Smile for the camera.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any dental implants, please raise your hand. Just out of curiosity, take a survey. We got 2 people in the class. Okay, so maybe all of you have great dental genes. That's good for you. Today we're going to be talking about the 21st century technology of dental fillings. Activa, the Bioactive Restorative by the company Pulpdent. It is the first bioactive composite which releases and recharges calcium, phosphate, and fluoride, which are all important ions to your tooth health. This is the packaging. This is a picture of the distributor. It's got 3 main ingredients: the patented bioactive ionic resin, the patented rubberized resin, and the bioactive ionomer glass. Going over the bioactive ionic resin, this is the main component which allows the material to be bioactive and work with your saliva. So when there's a deficiency in calcium, phosphate, or fluoride, the material will release the ion to restore the concentration balance. And in that way it responds to the enamel demineralization. If you lose a lot of calcium, it'll restore it back into your saliva. Or if your saliva has an excess of calcium, it will take that opportunity to restore it back into the tooth. So when it is put into your tooth, it bonds and integrates with the tooth so that it becomes part of the tooth. It essentially acts like new enamel. The rubberized resin gives it more of a modulus which responds like your enamel, so that it doesn't act too hard or too soft, and that it stays in place, absorbing shock and stress and resisting wear and fracture, so that the life of the implant is as long as possible. Theoretically, it could be longer than your own life. Bioactive ionomer glass is the fluoride component. It houses the fluoride, it maintains the fluoride concentration within the material, and it keeps a seal. It's the most electronegative, so nothing's really going to compete with it in that aspect to seal off the saliva. The way this was produced is previous composites and glass ionomers have been used in this application before, and when you combine the properties, you get a resin modified glass ionomer, and that's where the peak of the performance comes from. Previous dental filling materials, as the properties increase for mechanical, the bioactivity properties decrease, and vice versa. So this was really a compromise that was well balanced. This right here is my tooth. Before and after, you can see the decay and the brown spot in the hole that had to be carved out from the last filling I had there. And then my dentist, I had to actually ask him to get this material. Most dentists don't have this. You have to ask for this. It restored the tooth. It looks almost like new. And if you compare it to the other options you have, a lot of the composites are polymer based, and those only last about 5 to 10 years on average. So it's not something that is reliable, and it's cheap. And if you don't have a lot of wear and tear on your teeth, and it's not the biggest deal. If you're an old elderly person, you might not need as much of a investment in your own teeth implants if you still have them. So the younger people more often get amalgams because they're cheap and last a little bit longer than composites. But both the composites and the amalgams all have carcinogens in them, like bisphenol and mercury. And though there's studies that will try and disprove this, there's plenty of studies that do prove the carcinogenicity of these materials. It's always something you want to avoid. Gold and cubic zirconium is a luxury I can't afford. I don't know about you. It's not something most people can afford. It's really not in the scheme of another option here, when this is only $250 a tooth on average and has no carcinogens. We go into some independent studies separate from the studies and findings that were advertised on the Activa website. This is Lopez and Garcia recently did a study. We compared the non-diluted to the 1 to 4 diluted and 1 to 2 diluted samples. For the time in, you want to look at the 72-hour intervals. I couldn't get that number any bigger, but trying to show that these stars up here show the significance, and you can see they all significantly different in the non-diluted form. But the Activa, this is the kids version. There's slight differences in different versions of it, very similar though. You can see that is the least much of an issue and closest to the control, even though they're all significantly different. And when you get out to the 1:4 dilution, there's no significant difference between the control and the Activa, where the Riva Light and Ionolux competitors in this case showed significant difference in lower absorbance, which is indicative of more toxicity. This is a figure where we show the cell density within the implant. This is the control as if there is no implant, and the Activa Kids comes closest to the control in the density and the alignment. You can see the Riva Light and the Ionolux do not have a consistent alignment among the cells, and there's much less density there. Here's another figure. This is a little bit harder to see on the black and white grayscale version, but you can see if you get a little bit closer, the Ionolux has almost no adhesion. These are all the materials with the cells adhering to them. The Riva Light is more adhesion, but you can see some cell death and apoptosis symptoms where a lot of these are not well defined. It seems like they just exploded the cells. And the Activa Kids really shows defined cell structures where the cells are actually adhering to the disc. So this study concluded greater cell migration, better cell morphology, and more metabolic activity than the competitors, and that was the goal for Activa. Here's another independent study where we show that the nanocomposite is one of those composite polymer implants you can choose, and is a little bit cheaper, has better mechanical properties, but the one thing, because it's bisphenol based, it's already carcinogenic, and then the other issue you have, it's not bioactive, so it's going to maintain these properties throughout the life of the implant, and they're only going to decrease. The Activa will restore its mechanical properties, and it will restore the toughness, which is the key factor of these kind of implants. The only reason they fail is because the toughness fails. They deform or they pop out, however that happens. With the Activa, instead you're going to have the saliva carrying your phosphate, calcium, and fluoride, and it's going to interact with your enamel and with the Activa and exchange those ions to maintain the structure and integrity of the implant. Theoretically, if this all maintains constant exchange in an ideal situation, which probably not, but it could outlast you, the implant, which is what we aim for in our implants. Here's another independent study where we show that the immunogenicity factors are listed here. The multinuclear giant cells are an immunoreaction. The main key of this slide is you get out from 1 week to 2 weeks. There's not as much of a difference between the competitors, but you get to a month out at 4 weeks, and there's a clear significant difference where there's no coagulative necrosis, no inflammatory response, no vascular reaction, and no multinuclear giant cells arriving as an immune response to the Activa implant, whereas the iRoot BP and the MTA HP competitors all had responses in all of those categories all the way out to a month. This is a figure which shows the encapsulation border. This is the control, where this is the end of the implant, and this border here is the capsule which is formed. The capsule of the control is most consistent with the capsule of the Activa. You can see it's dense and thin, whereas the iRoot BP creates a larger, thicker capsule, as well as the MTA is a less uniform and less dense and more deformed capsule. So this is indicative of a less quality capsule around the implant. So the calcium silicate competitors here are not standing up to the healing ability in rat subcutaneous tissue for the implant compared to Activa. And here is the immunoreaction specifically for alpha SMA and cast paste